some of these strategies that are now developing should take a lot of risk away, because they're about utilising all of the resource and asset you've got on that land that you love, and not feeling like you have to buy more in, and not having that cost all the time. It's thinking about how can I really make use of all of the asset that I've got here at my fingertips.
That was Kate Still. You'll be hearing more from her today. Welcome to the Agricology podcast. I'm Matt Smee.
And I'm Janie Coldbeck. Across this season, we're exploring the ideas and practices around optimising carrying capacity for livestock. We'll be in conversation with farmers, advisors, vets and academics as we explore what optimal carrying capacity means to them and how this concept can be supported on farms to help the animal, the environment and the farmer.
I'm Kate Still. I'm the Head of Farming Programmes at the Soil Association. I have been here for 14 years now, primarily in an animal welfare role as an animal welfare advisor, and then sort of over the last 8 years or so have very much broadened out that remit into both a very strong focus on making sure that we are producing or ensuring a good life for farmed animals and focusing on farm animal welfare, but also working within the kind of nature-friendly agroecological transition space. And really from a soil association's perspective, thinking beyond just organic farmers. Although organic farmers are incredibly important to us, they really are the best of what we want to achieve. We're really conscious of the fact that there's a huge amount of farmers out there who would like to do things a bit differently and to be working on improving soil health, increasing biodiversity, reducing their inputs, improving animal welfare, doing all of those things, but aren't necessarily wanting to go organic, and we want to make sure that we can support them as well.
And you've got some links with Innovative Farmers, obviously.
Yeah, so Innovative Farmers is one of our big key programmes. It was 10th anniversary last year, year before, and it's really a programme that supports farmers to deliver their own research on farm.
So within your, sort of under your title, you run field labs as well. You sort of cross over, actually do delivery of those projects at the same time.
Yeah, so I've been delivering field labs since the programme started back in whenever it was, 2014, 13. And then certainly over the last sort of 5 years have focused a lot on forage and diverse leys and optimising grazing, quite a bit of focus on dairy again, optimising dairy using extended resting periods in grazing. So yeah, a lot of that kind of more livestocky type grazing focused ones. Yeah.
We're here to sort of talk about optimal carrying capacity. I just wanted to start out really by asking from your perspective, what does it mean? What does optimal carrying capacity mean? Especially those sort of factors around environment, farm health, animal health.
I mean, whenever I talk about anything when it comes to farming and a whole farm systems approach, I always go back to sort of balance and diversity and sort of balancing the two. And I guess when it comes to optimal carrying capacity, it's a combination of, are you thinking about what your farm can support to create healthy animals, healthy environment, healthy farmer bank balance with as little inputs as possible? And I guess that's when it comes down to where the balance happens. Because when it comes to, for example, ruminants, and we think about soil association standards, and we think about what a farm can support, it's all about being able to produce as much meat or milk or whatever from the forage that farm can support. And so then you go back to optimising the forage growth and the forage production on that farm and getting the balance then right with the type of animals, how they eat, where, what kind of forage that they're going to thrive on. And then that then helps you think about what the breed's going to be and how many numbers of animals that you can then sustain. And then if you then bring in the health of those animals, obviously to optimise the health of those animals, you both need to think about things like worm burdens and being able to make sure you've got clean grazing systems and long rotations, and making sure that you've got diversity of forage so that they've got all the nutrition that they need and all of the minerals that they need, and keeping that balance in check. But then when it comes to the actual overall health and welfare of those animals, to really optimise that, it then comes down to environment and thinking that you've got the right diversity of environment for the animals that you've got on farm and the type of stock on your farm, which is largely a lot to do with shade and shelter. It's largely a lot to do with the time of year and whether you need them to be up on a hill so that you've got good airflow to reduce fly strike, or to reduce problems with scald if there's like wet areas, all these kind of mixes of disease problems that you're going to have depending on the type of environment that you've got and the risks associated with that environment. Being able to really optimise what your land can carry will mean that you minimise all of those risks so that you've enabled to cover off all of those challenges that you've got. But it is getting harder and harder because obviously farmers are needing to be able to optimise production rather than maximise production. And so then they just need to think about having really healthy animals that are fertile, that are producing young stock, that are growing well, that are finishing early and quickly, that are not causing them any additional challenge, and that aren't really needing any additional bought in feed and all of those sorts of things. So I think that feeds in a great deal to what this kind of optimization looks like. It's being able to create that system that really works.
I quite like that sort of juxtaposition of the optimised production versus maximised production. You hear it in arable, sort of yield for vanity, margin for sanity sort of thing, and it has a similar edge to it in terms of you need a bit of a mindset shift to start looking at this from the other direction because of all the benefits that come from it, rather than just going, we've just got to get as much out, as many head of cattle out as we can this year, or as many litres of milk per day as we can. And this was saying, let's slow it down a little bit and look at the system as a whole, rather than just weight of product going out the farm gate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all got to be at a gross margin basis. So you've got to think about what that production looks like and then what those costs of producing that looks like. And so, in theory, if that margin then is the same, if you're producing, 200 head of cattle versus because you've had to buy in loads of extra feed because the risk of drought that year meant you didn't produce enough silage, or you didn't have enough grazing, and so you had to buy in a whole lot more. And so then the cost on that gross margin obviously is going to be much reduced than if you stuck with your 100 head or 50 head or whatever, which you knew you were going to have all the buffers. Your grazing platform has got all of the risk taken out of it because you've got that grazing wedge there. You can make that extra silage. You can feed hay or silage to protect your grazing rotation and make sure that you've got the residuals and you've got all the covers that you want, and all of those things that farmers are striving for but get ruined because of the weather. If you can get that risk balance right so that the all of the feed is in the feed bank in preparation, and you can get your livestock numbers right to match that, then that's kind of what you're hoping for. But yeah, rather than, and you can always take easy wins. Like if you end up with a whole lot more feed, you just buy in some stores, or top up with this or top up with that, or sell it to all the farmers who've got far too many animals and not enough ground.
So just kind of rolling on from that, going back to a sort of a much broader thing around the general benefits that livestock bring to sort of the health of a farm and the environment within the farm.
So, obviously it's been said a million times before in terms of like livestock's value within a whole farm system is that, well, fundamentally they can eat grass and forage that humans can't, so they can transfer that feed into very high quality protein food for humans. And so their role within what a food producing farming system looks like is really important in terms of producing a massive chunk of food from ground that, can't be utilised by humans. I mean, that's obviously the sort of one big role in terms of overall food production. But I think what's so key and why it's so important that more, we go back to more mixed farms across the whole of the farming landscape, is that they play this, such a vital role in terms of creating the diversity that you need across a whole farm system to ensure that, well, not only are you spreading risk in terms of your enterprise and your outputs, but you're then cutting down risk by using obvious things like herbal leys as solid break crops within your arable rotation, which has huge, endless benefits in terms of building fertility and then making sure that you've got pest and disease breaks and weed breaks that they can then destroy, all of that, so that you can then go into fresh ground for cropping, which you just can't really do just with a cropping cycle. You do need that 2 or 3 year, grass break to really be able to get on top of a lot of those pest and disease problems. And then obviously you've got them as, fertility building machines. Not only potentially if you're housing them, you've then created all of that, manure that you can then use as part of your whole farm system. But then if you're using them within the rotation, you're building that fertility, and you've just got that regeneration phase that's so vital within the whole farm system approach that we really need.
So talking about getting into sort of specific actions from your experience, whether it's soil association in general or the field labs you've been part of, the types of practices and approaches that can be used to help optimise rather than sort of maximise production of livestock. And we're probably talking more in the ruminant kind of side of things and pig and poultry.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as I sort of mentioned before, a lot of the areas that we've been focused on with farmers around optimisation has come down to grazing approaches and what's being grazed. So from a field lab perspective, obviously the last few years there's been huge focus, and we've done lots of work on this transition to diverse herbal leys, multi-species type leys, which obviously has been very beneficial to a lot of farmers, particularly as we've had some very risky drought years, and the herbal leys have really, shone through as performing well in that sort of low rainfall environment. I guess the challenge that there's been then, which comes, is that whole, finding the right thing that works on your farm, is getting the right species and the right mixes and sowing it at the right time of year that can really make sure that you've then got a mix of species that's going to thrive well. And we've had a number of field labs that have focused on different species mixes for different geographical parts of the country, different soil types, and really trying to get that, that optimal mix that really works for you, that delivers all of the things you want from a herbal ley, from soil improvement and dry up tolerance and mining nutrients and providing really highly nutritious feed that your animals are going to enjoy, but also fundamentally that's going to last, and that you're going to be able to, keep that diversity there for a long period of time without having to constantly re-sow. So that has been a really strong field lab area for us. Another sort of area, I guess, is then the grazing approach. And one of the things that I know people are being, some concern around the sort of the sustainable farming incentive payments for herbal leys, and herbal leys sort of being, obviously a really valuable tool to a lot of farmers, is that there's risk of bringing up a lot of their permanent pasture to sow down into herbal leys, and then you're obviously losing a lot of that kind of fine grassland diversity within permanent pasture, and then putting in some perhaps sort of slightly odd mixes of species and losing that kind of natural diversity that you've got in existing permanent pasture sward. So we've done quite a bit of work as well in terms of optimising and improving diversity in existing permanent pastures through grazing strategies. It's that balance between getting the grazing right and getting the species right, whether that's what's existing and what's new. And I work quite a lot with a advisor in New Zealand called John King, who I've had huge, input from, and really valuable source of knowledge for me, because a lot of the work that they've been doing in New Zealand is perhaps a little bit ahead in some places in terms of forage-based diets and interesting sort of species mixes and all that kind of thing. And I guess what he's interestingly reporting is that, a lot of farmers are finding that they just can't maintain production because they've still got so much to learn in terms of their grazing skills and being able to get the covers right and the rotation right and that balance that you need to make sure that the animals are eating what you need them to eat in the period of time that you need them to eat it. So yeah, there's still a huge amount to learn. And we did a really interesting field lab on sort of winter forage, like kale mixes and mixing different cereals and brassicas and things together. I think mostly for finishing lambs. And again, really interesting in terms of sort of soil health results. And I think some of the actual productivity gains on the lambs wasn't that significant, but I think the farmers could see a lot of value in the diversity of species from a soil health and biodiversity point of view, and a bit from a animal interest point of view, that was sort of overall more of a wider win than just the fact that from that single year, knowing that they're very variable, that you get a lot of change in terms of production. So I think there's lots of add-ons. So I've got a really nice group of dairy farmers, a lot of them are sort of Devon and Dorset and some are wider, who are looking at this extended resting period as part of their grazing strategy, and just more of a taller grass grazing approach and that kind of optimal recovery that they're all looking for on kind of 30-day rounds or whatever, depending on the time of year. And just the knowledge sharing within that group has been just so amazing, because there's some particularly really keen and eager farmers from a sort of soil health perspective and what they're trying to achieve, again trying to look for the kind of silver bullet sort of answers, and it just builds from one idea to another. But one of the farmers has sort of changed their grazing approach across their whole farm on the back of the field lab, which has been
the whole farm's grazing system has shifted off the back of that one.
Just sort of seeing the benefits, we've had some webinars and other learning opportunities that's really kind of brought home to them the benefits that they started to see, and then gone, okay, this is working. Because there's the risk, obviously, when it comes to dairy particularly, is that you let the grass grow a bit taller and it loses some of it, the risk that it will lose its nutritional quality and then the milk will drop, or I think there's that's taken lots of playing around with, because the grass was quite tall and then the cows were going in and filling themselves up, and then they wouldn't want to eat then on the next round, on the evening one, because they sort of filled their rumens up. So and how you make that work to make sure you get them to eat what you want them to eat all the time. So there's just this constant cycle of learning and sharing. And I think the thing with field labs is that you just get that stuff out straight away, whereas obviously there's a place for all of the academic university-led institute-led research. We need all that stuff, but it can be very slow in terms of getting that end result out into the wider farming community so that they can grab hold of it and run with it. Whereas the field lab approach is just so instant, and because it focuses a lot on the communication and knowledge sharing and providing all these opportunities to go, okay, we've done this, that hasn't worked, we're going to try this year, or we've only been looking at it for 6 months, but we've already found this, isn't that cool, kind of thing. That rapid learning is key.
So going on from sort of field labs on, you look at grazing is obviously one of the biggest strategies to look at, and I like this sort of highlighting you don't have to plough up your permanent pasture, and there's lots of work to be done on just reseeding what's there to kind of optimise that, and that's sort of linking those practices to the benefits they have to animal health, really, and sort of things you've seen within those practices that's kind of, this is driving a drop in mastitis or other sort of issues that farmers normally face. But when you're looking to go, we've reduced our herd size or we've optimised it, and these are the health benefits we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of evidence of that, and there's quite a few farmers who I've been talked to over the years who will constantly say, their old permanent pasture meadows, their old species-rich meadows are always the ones that, produce the most grass, that the animals are happiest on, that, they don't seem to have the kind of like disease risks or whatever that you might be getting in the kind of, obviously, the monocultures of high sort of energy-rich species or whatever it might be. So, I mean, there's been loads of evidence that demonstrates that those sort of species-rich pastures enable huge carrying capacity of livestock. I guess it's the challenge that we have is that those pastures of that level of diversity of herbs and legumes and grasses that are producing all of those, nutrients that we want, that are providing all of that habitat for insects that we want, that are still producing lots of kind of nutritious food, because of the way that they've been improved over the years through applications of manure, through artificial nitrogen, through sort of attempts to reseed. I mean, they're actually few and far between. So what we need to work on is the permanent pastures that have had levels of improvement through, all of those things. How can we bring that level of diversity back into play so that they are delivering all of those outcomes that we want from a kind of biodiversity, animal health perspective? And there are, lots of strategies we can use, whether that's green hay, whether that's feeding the animals some of the grass or legume species and letting them spread that seed. A lot of it is around allowing much longer rounds and much taller covers and much taller residuals, and just allowing those plants to really have space to breathe and set seed and do all those things that we need them to do. But it all just takes lots of time, and obviously lots of farmers don't feel like they have that time available to them to allow that kind of recovery. So it's just how we can make sure that we've got, say, the farming payment schemes in place, which is really great that we do now have like those maintenance payments and the sustainable farming incentive that can like nurture that recovery period, rather than just feeling like bing bang, I'll get the payment and plow it up and say something else. As if I can have those maintenance payments to go through that recovery period on my permanent pastures, then it will, give you more incentive to do that.
Yeah, so really use them as a tool to kind of give you the time that you need to make the change happen.
Yeah, and start to develop some more of the tools. So, talking about permanent pasture, obviously there's lots of things that you can do on a slow burn in terms of getting more seed mixture in there, opening up the sward, grazing it down, getting some, either doing bale grazing or green hay, or getting broadcasting additional seed in there potentially. But most of it is done through these kind of longer term rotational grazing to get them to recover. But yeah, it's just getting that balance right between what fields have got the potential to do that, and then what fields you think really would benefit from, a reseed kind of thing. But there is a risk that we're going to be sort of wanting just the quick wins too quickly. And, there's just massive overgrazing, whether it's in an upland hill perspective or whether it's in sort of lowland perspective. Or I've been doing quite a bit of work looking at equines and, the impact of horse paddock grazing and how we can try and recover those types of paddock systems by getting the diversity back in those swards, and like combating all of the worm burden issues that you get with having loads of horses constantly overgrazing and trying to get the rotational systems, all the weed problems they have with all the perennial weeds and thistles and stuff. And there's loads that we can do, that we can try and combat by getting that diversity back in there as a starting again. But there's equally loads that needs to be done to sort of recover those permanent pastures.
Changing grazing strategies or adopting new grazing strategies, how can they have a positive impact on the kind of farm health, so the health of the business?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to obviously having viable farming businesses, that is the number one essential reason behind how we can support all our farmers going forward, because if they're not viable farming businesses, then they're not going to exist. It was really interesting. We did a workshop recently and we were focusing on gaps in livestock research, and it was particularly around cattle. And we were there thinking, it'll be a load of stuff around, I don't know, forage again, going back to our blooming herbal leys and any kind of research gaps there, or whether it would be about breeding or fertility or whatever it may be, disease risks. And all of the farmers, it came back down to labour and to abattoirs and to skills within the farming system, and being able to make money from just farming and not feeling like you needed to have, endless diversifications or added value situations or working off farm, that you could actually just make money from doing good farming. But yeah, it was really interesting to demonstrate that these are the important things. These are the challenges. Having to be like an expert in farming schemes and keeping up together with all of the changes in farming schemes, all of that, all of those massive challenges were what is on everyone's minds, which is obviously, of course, why is that? Like, the infrastructure issues around abattoirs and stuff is just horrendous, and it's a massive challenge for organic farmers, not having certified abattoirs and all this sort of thing, massive challenges. So yeah, when it comes to the whole farm business in terms of like optimising what it can carry, you need all that kind of stuff in check in terms of actually knowing where your market is and know who you're going to sell to. But I mean, I think the point is, with a lot of these new grazing approaches, the not new isn't the word, but anyway, these sort of optimising forage grazing approaches, so kind of rotational grazing and paddock grazing and strip grazing and all these sorts of things. And the thought is that, from sticking a load of animals in a field and closing the gate and walking away, which felt like a very, straightforward, easy thing to do, some of the risks, I guess, people see with paddock grazing, rotational grazing, one is getting the infrastructure in place around fencing, having staff on farm who are good at doing electric fencing and that are able to do that as part of their daily routine, and having the time to move fences, to have the water, to have all those sorts of things. Yes, there is requirements to make sure that that sort of infrastructure is in place. But I think then, once you can get those things in place, there's so much evidence to show that these sorts of rotational, optimising, recovery, length, grazing strategies just produce results when it comes to production, to forage growth, to environmental benefits. We've got loads of evidence from the Reading Diverse Forages programme that showed how you could, grow without any nitrogen inputs on the diverse leys, how you could finish steers just as well, if not better, I think, in terms of production. So we know the results are there if you can, start to really focus on recovery, really focus on getting your animals to eat what you want them to eat, and get those species diversity right, and get the right animals that can perform how you want them to. And if you can get all that right, then the stress will come out of it, because you'll know that you're producing enough grass or enough forage overall, and that that you're going to get the finishing returns that you want. And so it should all work from a kind of farm cost efficiencies point of view, because you're not having to buy in extra forage and buy in extra feed. And the rotational nature of a lot of these approaches do result in, far more clean grazing approaches, because obviously there's a lot of sort of weight given to diverse herbal leys being good in terms of reducing anthelmintic use and the need for much lower wormers use, and lots of farmers obviously suggest they don't need to use wormers, and a lot of it is down to kind of tannin levels in some of the species, with the chicory and plantain and things providing good anthelmintic properties. But a lot of it is the fact that you've just got swift movement of animals through fields. They're only grazing down to a certain area. They're not getting down to the worms and things. So a lot of it's just the changing grazing, changing how they're eating as much as all of the plants. So if you bring that in as well, you're reducing all of those inputs that are required, that would be required in other sorts of grazing approaches where you're just grazing too tight and everything is getting too worm sick. So there's a lot of benefits there. But I think from a farm staff point of view, it seems that, well, some of the anecdotal evidence that have been gathered from talking to different farmers, they seem to really kind of enjoy the relatively instant effect of moving to that sort of grazing approach and being sort of connected to their animals and moving them on a daily basis and seeing how it's like approached in terms of the trampling, in terms of what they've been eating, and being able to change things around and feeling that connection with how their animals are transitioning around their farm, seems to be really, really helpful and beneficial. So yeah, I think there's a lot of wins there. I am, one of the things that obviously I focused on, which I mentioned, is the animal welfare side of things, and doing a big bit of work at the moment on working on these resource tiers to enable animals to have a good life and to sort of provide that framework of what good looks like. And I think we need to be really conscious. I was just talking to my colleague about kind of pastured poultry and sort of the use of chicken tractors and some of these different approaches of getting too focused on certain outcomes. And I think one of the issues with some of the focus on rotational grazing and some of these different approaches is that it's become very soils focused, which is great, or very carbon focused and then very soils focused, so that you want to build soil organic matter, get that carbon storage. That's all brilliant, getting soil recovery. But then you really got to think about in the round, what kind of environment are you providing for your animals in that rapid move approach? Are you providing enough shade and shelter? Have they got enough space to get away from each other? Are you keeping them in stable groups? Are you thinking about making sure that you've created enough sort of opportunities for those animals to move into their own space should they need to, even though it is supposedly sort of following this natural herding rhythm? But if they're too tight and they can't get away from each other, that's really quite sort of risky.
Min had mentioned that. I was chatting with her about the issues with rotational grazing that's too tight, whereby the cows basically don't ruminate because they haven't got time to get away from the others to sit and relax, and so they actually just keep eating.
Yeah,
and it's actually quite stressful.
There was a field lab that we did on this approach from these French vets called Obsolim, which is this kind of set of playing cards which is all kind of focused on observational approaches to really looking at optimising rumination, and then optimising rumination resulting in optimising production or optimising food efficiency. And across these cards, you look at kind of inflammation in animals' eyes, in their hooves, in like changes in their coat condition, lots of focus on them in pats and manure, and but one of the key things is around synchronized rumination and making sure that they have, this is particularly focused on cows but also sheep as well, but a lot of the work that we were looking at was on cows, is that they have opportunity to have a meal and then to rest and ruminate together. And I think there was a risk in some of the farms that we were working with that they were rapidly moving fences like multiple times a day. So all the cows were thinking about, where are we going next? Eat more, to eat more, to eat more. What's next? And always stood at the fence. And this kind of sense of kind of, like you say, stress and urgency of like, I got something fresh. And never thinking, right, I've had my dinner. now going to sit down and think, and rest and ruminate. And also, that always going into something fresh was not necessarily, good for their rumen all the time. So there's a lot still to play with, I guess, not saying anyone's doing anything wrong, or, everyone's just sort of trying to think about how we're going to make this work. And then you've just got to go, actually, maybe is that ideal? Maybe we need to tweak a bit here, think about what, what's actually wanted by the animal to, again, optimize their health, their natural behavior, maximising the use of all of the food you've got. And if it means that you end up with, more food, just store it, and then think about how you're going to use it, rather than go, I've got all this forage I want them to eat, quick, move them on kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, thinking about things, I know, is key from a mental health perspective for farmers. And I know, it's obviously a massive issue. I was at this Landex event the other week, because we've been doing all this work working with land-based colleges, and one of the lecturers there who just done a PhD or a big bit of research on farmer mental health, and it is terrifying, the combination of statistics from suicide and general kind of poor mental health and risk point of view, down to kind of isolation, feeling like you're sort of stuck in a situation you can't change, and all of these challenges. And we know that farmers put huge amounts of pressure on themselves. But I think some of these strategies that we've got in place, or some of these strategies that are now developing, should take a lot of risk away, because they're about utilising all of the resource and asset you've got on that land that you love, and not feeling like you have to buy more in, and not having that cost all the time of, the risk associated with increased in feed costs and what that, attributes to. Is thinking about, how can I really make use of all of the asset that I've got here at my fingertips, and whether that does mean adjusting some of the, breeds that you're using, or the number of animals that you're carrying. Then there's a lot to be said of feeling in control.
I'm really conscious of time.
Yeah.
I've eaten so much of your time.
No, it's fine. I knew that I would witter on.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
When you think back, you're like, what were you saying? In terms of like, where were you going with that?
There's really good stuff there.
But yeah.
Thanks for listening in to this episode. Check out the show notes for links relating to this discussion and further reading.
Our thanks go out to the Linbury Trust, whose funding made this podcast series possible.
Don't forget to visit the Agricology website for more information about the practices discussed in today's episode.
There'll be more episodes coming up, so don't forget to tune in again.